The studio of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert was lit up like a holiday tree, stage lights beaming down. The crowd burst into applause, buzzing with excitement for a night packed with laughs. Millions more were glued to their TVs and phones, watching as two big names faced off, Stephen Colbert and Karoline Leavitt. Nobody saw what was coming next, though. Before we jump into it, drop a comment with where you're tuning in from and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more stories like this. Stephen Colbert lounged in the host's chair, rocking his usual grin that screamed confidence. His eyes twinkled with smarts and a dash of sass. He'd been spinning political hot topics into clever jokes for over 20 years. Across from him sat Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary ever. Her platinum blonde hair popped, her sharp stare locked and loaded. She was all about that conservative Gen Z vibe, super loyal to the Trump crew, and not afraid to take anyone on. Her fair skin matched the original description, no changes there. Colbert kicked things off with a playful jab, his voice chill but sneaky with meaning. "Karoline, you here to back up Trump or show me how to whip up TikToks for your crowd?" The audience cracked up, clapping like crazy, but Leavitt didn't blink. She leaned in, flashed a smooth smile, and hit back fast. "I'm here to keep it real, Stephen. Something you might not get after 20 years turning everything into a one-liner." The room's laughter fizzled out, replaced by shocked whispers. Colbert wasn't ready for that quick comeback, and the vibe flipped from fun to tight in a snap. Cameras swung to the crowd, some jaws dropped, others muttered to their neighbors. Stephen Colbert, caught off guard for a sec, bounced back with that grin fans knew from a million broadcasts. He leaned forward, hands on the desk, his voice still dripping with that classic bite. "The truth, huh, Karoline? So tell me, has my comedy changed the world, or do you think only your White House talks can pull that off?" The crowd chuckled, a few clapped, still Team Colbert. But Leavitt didn't budge. She straightened up, arms crossed, eyes glued to him. "Comedy?" Leavitt started, her tone steady but sharp enough to cut through. "It's just your way of dodging the tough stuff, Stephen. You poke fun at everything, politics, people, big issues, but what's it added up to? Your fans laugh, head home, and nothing shifts. Meanwhile, I'm out there every day facing real questions from the press, giving straight answers, standing up for what I believe in." She paused, letting it sink in. A few claps popped up from one corner, but most folks stayed quiet, waiting for Colbert's move. Colbert wasn't about to let Leavitt steal the spotlight on his own stage. He let out a little laugh, half real, half for show, the kind he used to keep things light. "Karoline, I'm not dodging a thing," he said, his swagger kicking back in. "Laughter's my tool. I shine a light on stuff people like you try to sweep under the rug, like shaky policies or big promises that don't deliver. I don't need a podium to get people thinking. I do it right here, every night, with millions watching." The crowd went wild, cheers bouncing off the walls. Colbert nodded their way like he'd just nailed a slam dunk. But Leavitt didn't flinch. She tilted her head, giving a tight smile that hinted she was about to drop something big. "Really, Stephen?" she asked, her voice pushing back, a little teasing. "So what's different because of you, besides a 30-second giggle? You say you're showing the truth, but it looks more like you're just tossing easy zingers at folks trying to do real jobs. I'm out there taking on the press, Congress, the world, to stand by what I believe, and you? You're chilling here in your cozy studio, cashing in on jokes without ever stepping into the heat." Her words landed hard, her fair-skinned face intense as she stared him down. The audience stirred, laughter faded into murmurs. Some nodded her way, others swapped confused looks. Colbert kept his smile, but a tiny spark of annoyance flashed in his eyes. He tapped his fingers on the desk. A little tick his die-hard fans knew meant he was cooking up a reply. "Karoline," he said, dropping some of the playfulness, "you act like I'm not in the game. I've been called out, hassled, even sued for what I say on air. I don't just read lines. I push back on folks in charge, like you and your team, and I do it my way." Leavitt didn't let him wrap it up. She jumped in, her voice picking up a bit but still cool as ice. "Pushing back? Nah, Stephen, you toss jabs and duck behind the laughs. You don't deal with real blowback. You've got a crew writing your bits, a room full of fans ready to cheer anything you say. Me? I'm out there solo, facing hundreds of reporters daily. No notes, no shield. You call that risk? I call it a sweet gig." She stopped, staring him down, letting her point hang there. The scattered claps from Colbert's crew faded, and folks started eyeing Leavitt differently. Not just some young guest, but a real contender. Colbert pressed his lips together, clearly fishing for a way to flip the script. He leaned in, sliding back into his jokey vibe. Caroline, you make it sound like I'm juggling pies in a circus. But if I'm not doing anything, why are you here on my turf, standing up for yourself? He winked at the crowd, fishing for laughs. But Leavitt wasn't biting. She fired back in a heartbeat. I'm here because you've poked fun at stuff me and tons of others care about. Stephen, you think it's all a big laugh, but to us, it's real life. You can crack jokes, but don't think I'll just sit back while you turn it into a sideshow. Karoline Leavitt paused, her fair-skinned face steady, eyes locked on Colbert, challenging him to come up with something solid. Stephen Colbert took a slow breath, trying to keep things light with a quick line. All right, Karoline, you're tougher than I figured. Guess we're just warming up, huh? He grinned, but the crowd's chuckles were thin, not enough to cover Leavitt's vibe. She gave a small nod, like she was cool with that, but her sharp gaze said she was ready for whatever he'd toss her way. Colbert kept his smile up, though it didn't feel as easy anymore. His fingers tapped quicker on the desk. Fans knew that meant her last shot. Don't expect me to sit quietly while you turn it into a circus, had hit him somewhere deep. The audience stayed quiet, eyes bouncing between them, waiting for the next move. Colbert, with his years of hosting chops, leaned in, his voice carrying a little sarcastic edge. Caroline, you act like I'm out to bury the truth, but I'm just a guy telling stories with some laughs. What about you? What's your story behind that podium? Leavitt didn't jump to answer. She took a breath, uncrossed her arms, and rested her hands on her knees, her stare still glued to him, now with a fiercer spark. Fine, Stephen, she said, her voice smooth but with a bite. You want a story? I'll give you one, not for giggles, but so you get it. The crowd mumbled, some leaning in, curious where she was headed. Colbert wasn't sure if this was his shot to slip in a zinger, or if she was about to come at him again. There was this guy I worked with, Leavitt started, her tone slow and deliberate, every word picked with care. His name was Jake, young, sharp, and totally bought into what we were doing on the campaign. He wasn't the face on TV, not a big talker, just one of the behind-the-scenes folks. He wrote speeches, set up events, kept things running so people like me could step up. Jake was the type you'd never notice, Stephen, but without him, we'd have been stuck. She paused, scanning the audience to make sure they were with her. The studio went dead quiet, just the soft sound of people breathing. Colbert opened his mouth, maybe to toss a joke and cut the tension, but Leavitt held up a hand, telling him to chill. He shrugged, leaned back, and let her roll. Jake put in crazy hours, she said, a little feeling creeping into her voice. He thought we were pushing for something huge, something worth it for the country. But then one day, a jab from you, or someone like you, flipped everything. Leavitt leaned forward, her fair skin catching the light, her eyes turning cold. Your show did a bit on our campaign. Called us obsessed, Trump's little helpers. Your fans ate it up, laughing like always. But Jake? He got caught in the crossfire. Someone filmed him working backstage, slapped some goofy text on it, and made him a joke online. He wasn't some big shot with 1 million followers to shrug it off. He was just a regular dude. Overnight, everyone saw him as a clown. Colbert pressed his lips tight, looking a little off balance. His eyes flicked between Leavitt and the crowd. And then what? He asked, trying to sound laid back. What's that got to do with me? I'm not done, Leavitt shot back, her voice solid, shutting down his dodge. After that clip, Jake got let go. Not because he messed up, but because people piled on, thinking it was no big deal to laugh at him. He lost his gig, his pride, and for a while, his belief in what he'd been working for. He told me it felt like everyone turned their backs on him, all over a joke he didn't ask for. She paused, letting it hang. The studio was pin-drop silent, no whispers, no laughs. But here's the key part, Stephen, Leavitt went on, her voice picking up strength. Jake didn't quit. He came back, worked with us again, not for cash, but because he still believed in what we were building. He didn't care about the spotlight or cheers. He just wanted his work to mean something. Now he's one of my go-to people, not because he's perfect, but because he's steady. He gets that real wins aren't about quick laughs. They're about sticking with folks who've got your back and making something that lasts. She leaned back, her fair-skinned face locked on Colbert. That's where we're different, Stephen, she said, her tone firm as steel. I roll with people like Jake, folks who pour their hearts into what they stand for. You cash in by turning them into punchlines, then move on when the lights dim. You call that storytelling? I call that wrecking things. The studio went totally quiet. No more whispers, just big, stunned eyes bouncing between Karoline Leavitt and Stephen Colbert. A few heads nodded, kind of agreeing with her take. Colbert jumped in quick, his voice a little sped up. Caroline, I don't pick on regular folks like that. I aim at the big shots. You, your boss, the whole system. That's not wrecking stuff. That's just asking questions. He let out a small chuckle, hoping to loosen things up, but the crowd barely responded, not enough to shake off Leavitt's heavy words. She didn't wait a beat, cutting him off sharp. This isn't joke time, Stephen. This is real life, not your funny little script. You might target the system, but you've hit people like Jake, folks who can't clap back. You think it's no big deal, but I've seen the mess it leaves, and I'm telling you, it's not nothing. Leavitt paused, her fair-skinned face locked on him, eyes blazing. Colbert sat still, that famous grin wiped clean off his face. The audience was split, some looking down, others staring at Leavitt with fresh respect. All you could hear was the crowd breathing soft and slow. He took a deep breath, fishing for a comeback, but for the first time that night, he looked stuck. Leavitt stayed chill, arms crossed again, her fair skin glowing under the lights, her vibe calm but strong. Her story about Jake, the guy who got turned into a punchline by shows like Colbert's, hit the room hard. People's eyes flicked between awe for Leavitt and a weird tension toward Colbert. He sat there, hands not tapping anymore but clutching the desk's edge, like he was trying to hang on. His go-to smile was gone, swapped for a tight, rare look. Leavitt, though, sat tall, arms crossed, her sharp stare like an arrow ready to finish the job. Colbert sucked in a breath, trying to switch the vibe back to his usual groove. Caroline, he said, aiming for easy, but with a tiny shake in his voice. I feel bad about your Jake, honest, but you can't pin every tough break on me or folks like me. We're here to entertain, get people thinking, not to mess up someone's life. He shrugged, tossing a weak grin, waiting for the crowd to cheer like usual. But this time, the claps were light, spotty, and fizzled out fast into the heavy quiet. Leavitt wasn't letting it slide. She leaned in, her fair-skinned face steady, eyes glued to Colbert, her voice low but packed with force, like a wave about to crash. You feel bad, Stephen? She asked, a little teasing but dead serious. You say you don't mean to mess anyone up, but do you ever think about who's holding you up? The writers, the crew, the people hustling so you can sit there tossing zingers every night? Do you care about them, or are you too busy cracking up at others to see you'd be nowhere without them? Her question cut through the air, sharp and heavy, hitting Colbert right where it hurt. The room went silent as a ghost town, eyes wide and locked, like they'd just seen something wild. Colbert pressed his lips tight, hands gripping the desk harder, scrambling for an answer. He opened his mouth, voice wobbling a bit. I don't act like my team isn't there, Caroline. They're awesome, and I'm thankful. But I'm here to do my thing. Make people laugh, ask the tough stuff. I'm not some big hero, and I don't play like I am. He tried a little laugh, aiming to slide back into his jokey vibe, but the smile looked stiff, empty. Leavitt didn't give him room to wiggle out. She shot back fast, her voice picking up a touch, but still smooth as glass. That's the whole issue, Stephen. You pick laughs over owning up. You think you're slick, sitting safe in this studio with fans cheering every line. But I see something else. A guy ducking behind clever words because he's scared to step up, scared to own what he stirs up. You call that your thing? I call it playing it safe. The audience held its breath like the air just froze. Colbert's eyes got big, his face locking up, that usual cool nowhere in sight. He opened his mouth, ready to say something, but nothing came out. Leavitt sat steady, her fair skin catching the light, her gaze burning into him, not budging an inch. The crowd felt the sting of playing it safe, a jab nobody'd ever thrown at Stephen Colbert, the guy who'd made a name poking at the big dogs. But now he was the one backed into a corner. Colbert cleared his throat, trying to pull himself together. Caroline, he said, his voice wobbling a bit. You're painting me as the bad guy here. I'm not ducking anything. I put myself out there every day. People criticize me, dislike me, all for saying what I think is right. You might not vibe with my style, but don't say I'm not stepping up. He glanced at the crowd, fishing for some backup in their faces, but all he got were blank stares, a mix of curiosity, and a couple of slow nods leaning Leavitt's way. She didn't let him finish. Caroline Leavitt jumped in fast, her voice cutting through clear and strong. You call sitting there, backed by your crew and cheered by your fans, a risk? I face a wall of reporters every day, Stephen. No notes, no friendly faces, nowhere to chill. I put my job, my rep, my beliefs out there every time. You drop a joke and let others clean up the mess. You're not the bad guy. You just don't have the guts to really stand tall. The studio stayed dead quiet. No claps, no laughs, just the quick breaths of the crew stuck behind the cameras. Colbert dipped his head for a sec, hands letting go of the desk's edge and resting in his lap, like he'd just taken a hit. He looked up at Leavitt, his fair-skinned face showing eyes that weren't snarky anymore. Maybe puzzled, maybe getting it. He opened his mouth, but no slick comeback came, no pushback. For the first time ever, he just sat there, wordless. Leavitt leaned back, arms crossed again, her fair skin calm under the lights, her eyes still fired up. She didn't need to add more. Her point had done the impossible, left Stephen Colbert, the king of chatter, totally speechless. The room soaked in the moment. A lady up front whispered to her buddy. She just took him down on his own stage. It was quiet, but in the hush it hit like a shout. Colbert sucked in a breath, trying to find his voice. "Karoline," he started, but it cracked, so soft you could barely catch it. He stopped, looked at his hands, then up again. His eyes weren't the confident host's anymore. They were a guy facing something big. Leavitt didn't smirk or rub it in. She just watched him, her fair-skinned face steady like she was saying, "I've laid it out, your move." Colbert's gaze dropped, then lifted, searching for his spark amid the rubble Leavitt left behind. The crowd didn't budge, eyes glued to the stage like it was a boxing ring where the big punch just landed, but the bell hadn't rung yet. Leavitt sat still, arms crossed, her face chill but her eyes burning like a champ who'd won but was ready for more. Colbert took another deep breath, shoulders moving like he was shaking off a heavy load. He raised his head, eyes not blank anymore but flickering with something new. He leaned forward, hands back on the desk, voice shaky at first but picking up steam. "Karoline, you're tough, no doubt. You just shut me up, and that's rare after 20 years. He let out a little laugh, not snarky, just real. And the crowd tossed out a few light chuckles, like they wanted to cut the tension. "But I gotta stick up for my side, my realness, don't I?" Leavitt raised an eyebrow, not saying a word, but her eyes egged him on like, "Go for it." Colbert pushed ahead, voice firming up, though still a little rattled, like he'd been shoved to the edge. "You're right about one thing, Karoline," he said, picking his words slow and careful. "I don't always stop to think about the folks who get me here. My team, the writers, the crew. They're the heart of this show, and yeah, maybe I've overlooked that. I'm not flawless. I'll own it." He paused, looking at the audience, and this time a few soft claps popped up, like a nudge to keep going. But he wasn't done. He leaned closer to Leavitt, his fair-skinned face sharpening as he found a piece of himself again. "But you're off on one thing," he said, a spark of pushback in his tone. "You say I duck behind laughs, that I don't own up. Nope, I've spent my career calling out the big shots, people like you and your boss. I don't just make folks laugh, Karoline. I get them thinking, questioning, seeing stuff in a new light. That's not playing it safe. That's my way of pushing back." The crowd perked up, claps getting louder, like they felt Colbert clawing his way back. He pointed at Leavitt, voice rising with fire. "What about you, Karoline? You talk about stepping up, believing in your cause, but you're tied to a guy millions here don't buy. A guy folks say bends the truth, puts himself first. Is that stepping up or is it just sticking to your lane? You say I hide behind laughs. Are you hiding behind loyalty?" The studio hummed with whispers, some nodding with Colbert, others eyeing Leavitt for her next move. This was his biggest swing of the night, a last shot to flip the script and show he wasn't down for the count. The cameras swung to Leavitt's fair-skinned face, and for the first time, she smiled. Not a big win kind, but a cool, steady one. She leaned in, voice still smooth but loaded with weight. "I've been waiting for you to bring that up, Stephen," Karoline Leavitt said, pausing just long enough to let it sink in with the crowd before going on. "I'm loyal to what I think is right, not just some guy, but a bigger picture for this country. You might not get me, my boss, or the millions who back us, but at least I'm not ducking behind anything. I step up every day, facing the world, no script, no cheering fans. And I say what I believe, even when folks like you poke fun or call me out. That's where we're different. You might get people thinking, but I get them moving." Her words hit the room like a bold statement, not just answering Colbert, but doubling down on her stance. Stephen Colbert leaned back, his fair-skinned face showing eyes that weren't pushing back anymore, just a flicker of respect he couldn't shake. He gave a small nod, like he had to admit she'd matched his swing perfectly. "You're a tough one, Karoline," he said, his voice softer now, almost real. "I'm kind of stumped here. Maybe you've got a point, partly, but I still stand by what I do." Leavitt nodded back, staying quiet, like she didn't need to add more. She'd laid it all out, and the studio felt it. Claps started up, slow at first, then picking up. Not picking sides, but cheering a showdown that turned into more than just a debate. A real talk about belief and owning your stuff. Colbert glanced at the audience, his smile creeping back, but this time it wasn't cocky, just a rare, down-to-earth vibe. He raised a hand, like he was cooling the room down, and said, "Okay, I think we just had a legit moment here. She doesn't play around, folks." Leavitt cracked a tiny smile, her first hint of chill that night, but her fair-skinned face kept those steady, fierce eyes. She didn't need to say more to show she'd come out on top, not by flattening Colbert, but by making him take a hard look at himself. The crowd could feel the shift, from tight vibes to something heavier, deeper. Cameras swept over both their faces, catching this rare scene. Colbert owning a slice of defeat, Leavitt standing solid like a rock that wouldn't budge. The air in the room wasn't as wound up as it'd been minutes ago. It slid into a thoughtful hum, like everyone was wondering, what just clicked for us? Colbert lifted a hand, signaling for quiet, and the claps faded out. He leaned in, locking eyes with Leavitt, his tone dropping the fight and picking up a realness nobody saw coming. "Karoline, I gotta hand it to you. You're a real challenge. I've done this gig thousands of nights, met all kinds of people, but nobody's made me stop and chew on stuff like you just did." He let out a little laugh, kind of poking at himself, and the crowd tossed back some warm chuckles, like they felt him letting his guard down. "You're tough, you're sharp, and you don't pull punches. I respect that for real." Leavitt gave a slight nod, her fair-skinned face showing a touch of warmth for the first time. She smiled. Not a big "I won" grin, but one that said she knew she'd gotten through. "Thanks, Stephen," she said, her voice softer, but still carrying that inner fire. "I didn't come here to knock you out. I came to speak my truth, and I think we had a real talk, something you don't see much on TV these days." The crowd broke into gentle claps, some nodding like they felt the honesty in her words. Colbert nodded too, his eyes sparking with real curiosity now. "So, Karoline," he said, "if I've picked up anything from you tonight, what's the takeaway? What do you want me, or these folks, to walk away with?" He waved at the audience like he was handing Leavitt the mic for one last word, not just to him, but to everyone tuned in. Leavitt took a deep breath, uncrossing her arms and resting her hands light on her knees. She looked at Colbert, then turned to the crowd, her gaze hitting every row like she was talking straight to each person. "Success isn't about who's laughing loudest, Stephen," she started, her voice steady and strong. "It's not about who talks the most or gets the biggest cheers. Success is who's still standing when the laughs die down, when the lights go dark, when all you've got left is what you've put together and the people still riding with you. That's what I've learned from my work, from folks like Jake, and that's what I want you and everyone here to think about." The audience took it in, some nodding slow, others whispering to their neighbors, like Leavitt's words had tapped something real inside them. Colbert leaned back, his fair-skinned face locked on Leavitt with clear respect. He nodded, like he was still digesting it, then said, "You know, Karoline, I think you just dropped a lesson on me, and maybe this crowd, that I wasn't ready for when we kicked this off. I always figured laughs were how I left my mark, but maybe you're onto something. Maybe it's about who's got your back when it's all said and done." Leavitt gave a small smile, keeping quiet, like she knew her point had stuck. Colbert kept going, his voice carrying a rare straight-up tone. "I don't see eye to eye with you on everything, trust me I don't, but you've got a way of making people rethink. Maybe I misjudged you, and I'm sorry for that." He stuck out his hand, unexpected but smooth, and Leavitt shook it, a solid grip full of mutual props. The crowd clapped again, starting soft, then building, not to crown a champ or a loser, but to vibe with a moment where two different worlds found a little common turf. Colbert flashed his real smile. Leavitt held her steady gaze. It was a picture of a face-off that went way beyond what anyone thought it'd be. Colbert laughed a bit louder, saying, "I think we just pulled off something cool here, folks. She's no pushover, but I'll still try to get a laugh out of her next time if she's up for a round two." Leavitt let out a soft chuckle, her first easy moment of the night. "I'll think about it, Stephen," she shot back, her tone light but still cool as ever. She stood, smoothed her dress, and walked off stage with that same solid confidence, leaving the crowd clapping even harder. Colbert watched her go, shaking his head with a grin that said he was impressed, then turned to the audience. "All right, we're hitting a commercial break after that. I need some water and maybe a minute to bounce back." Stephen Colbert eased back into his chair, looking out at the crowd. For the first time that night, he didn't try to crack a joke, just nodded, like he was saying, she's got a point, at least enough to shake things up. As the late show lights dimmed and the outro tune kicked in, folks in the studio started getting up, but nobody bolted for the doors. The room buzzed with low chatter, not the usual light stuff after a comedy bit, but real, fired-up talks. A middle-aged guy halfway back turned to his buddy and whispered, "She made Colbert rethink. I've never seen him like that." A young woman nearby nodded, chiming in, "I'm not a Trump fan, but she's onto something. She's got real strength." Those kinds of whispers were everywhere, rolling into a big wave of thoughts. Outside the studio, the showdown's vibes hit fast once the show wrapped. Social media lit up with takes from people there live and folks watching at home. On X, @Leavitt vs. Colbert shot up the trends, with thousands of posts popping off in no time. One person wrote, "Karoline Leavitt just took over Colbert's stage. That wasn't a chat, it was a takedown." A diehard Colbert fan pushed back. "He didn't flop. He gave her room to speak and kept his chill. That's his thing." Online, it split into two crews. One hyping Leavitt as the Gen Z champ who shook up old-school media, the other sticking by Colbert as the satire boss who wouldn't budge. Big outlets didn't sleep on it either. Stories dropped quick with grabby headlines like "White House Press Secretary Shuts Down Stephen Colbert" and "Late Show Face-Off, Who Came Out on Top?" One writer said, "Leavitt brought a fresh vibe, straight up, no backing down, ready to take on heavyweights like Colbert. She's a sign of a generation that doesn't sweat traditional media." Another take backed Colbert. "He didn't lose, he listened, and that's what a sharp host does with a tough guest." Different spins, but everyone agreed. This was a night that stuck, not just for the drama, but for what it meant underneath. Back in the studio, as people trickled out, some hung around the exits, swapping thoughts. A young guy with glasses said to his pal, "They're both right, you know. Colbert makes you laugh and think, but Leavitt, she makes you feel like you gotta step up." An older lady nodded. "I've watched Colbert forever, but this is the first time he's been really pushed. That girl's the real deal." These weren't just quick feels. They showed a switch in how folks saw both of them. Online, clips of the clash pulled in millions of views, comments flooding the official Late Show video. "Leavitt just schooled Colbert on owning up," one said. Another shot back, "Nah, Colbert's still the man. He let her talk and stayed cool." The back and forth kept rolling, but it was clear. Leavitt had locked in as a fresh powerhouse, while Colbert had to take a hard look at his game, something he didn't often do in front of everybody. As the dust settled from Karoline Leavitt and Stephen Colbert's throwdown, what stuck wasn't just a cool late show night, it was a mark that wouldn't fade for the audience. In a world of laughs and arguments, Leavitt, with her fair-skinned face, showed straight-up truth, can outshine any punchline. She walked onto Colbert's turf not just to stand by her beliefs, but to hit home that success isn't about quick hype. It's about what you put together and who's still with you. Colbert, though pinned for a bit, proved he's more than a funny guy. He's someone who'll hear you out, at least this once. No clear champ or chump here, but it left a big question. You riding with Leavitt's no-filter style, or Colbert's knack for spinning tension into takeaways? Pick your side. This moment flipped how we see responsibility, loyalty, and what words can do. The clash between Karoline Leavitt and Stephen Colbert was like a snapshot of today's America. Gaps between generations, beliefs, and media getting wider every day. Leavitt, with her straight-talking ways and loyalty to her political lane, stood for the up-and-coming Gen Z crew. Young folks not scared to question the old ways, like when she pressed Colbert on what his laughs really cost. Colbert, with his fair-skinned face, held down the classic media spot, using humor to poke holes, but sometimes coming off as out of touch, like with Jake, a guy sideswiped by thoughtless jabs. This night mirrored how social media and TV aren't just fun anymore. They're where personal grit and shared values slug it out daily. Leavitt's big takeaway was all about sticking with people who've got your back. She said it herself. Success is who's left when the laughs fade. In an America where politics splits up families and friends, it's a nudge to hold tight to real ties, not just chase the crowd's cheers like Colbert leaned on early with his fans. When he owned up to sometimes forgetting his team, it was a wake-up. Don't let your own goals drown out the props you owe. Leavitt, talking up Jake, showed it's about staying true and keeping the quiet ones close. In a wild America, real wins aren't about the loudest noise. It's the solid ground you build with the ones who stick around.